All right, we're back. Graveyard Shift Movie Podcast, episode number 138. And this week, I watched Mother, with an exclamation point at the end, from 2017, starring Jennifer Lawrence and the bad guy from No Country for Old Men, which his name is like Jennifer Bardot or something like that. Like, he has this name I can't pronounce. Um, let's see. Hold on. Give me a second. Javier Bardem. That's it. That's not as difficult as I thought. That's nowhere near as difficult as I thought. But Mother from 2017, a movie I always wanted to watch but never watched it until now. And honestly, I'm not sure why I wanted to watch it. Because I'm not a Jennifer Lawrence fan. In fact, I pretty much hate everything that she's in. I think it started. I read the Hunger Games books, and then when the movies came out, watched the movies, and I hated how she portrayed Katniss Everdeen, like compared to how she was written in the books. And every scene, it just looked like she wanted to cry, and it was just really annoying. And to be fair, there is points in this movie where the whole time it's just like she's on the verge of tears, and later on in the movie, it's justifiable. But earlier in the movie, I'm like, why do you look like this? Stop doing this, you know? So I haven't enjoyed. I like Passengers with her and Chris Pratt. I think it would have been better. Spoiler for Passengers. I think it would have been better if it was told from her point of view, and later on in the movie, she learned that Chris Pratt woke her up because he didn't want to be alone, instead of it being told from Chris Pratt's point of view and we see him wake her up in it. I think it would have been cool if it was like a mystery. But that's about it. I think that's the only thing. Oh, and Don't Look Up was fine. But those are about the only two things I've enjoyed her in until now, because this movie is fucking batshit crazy, and I loved it. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. I know a lot of, once again, all I've heard is you either hate it or you love it. As I was reading shit, I saw that at its premiere, it got both a standing ovation and deafening boos. So that's pretty cool. That's an accomplishment. Yeah, this movie's crazy, and I loved it. It had just so much wacky shit going on. If you look a little deeper under the surface, it's pretty easy to tell what the story really is about, and then when you read later, and it confirms kind of what you were thought. But I don't think you have to take what the movie is written as. It's a bunch of religious stuff that I'll get into when we get in this. But I feel like there's other ways you could look at this movie. Like, a lot of it seemed like this is what a parent worries about as they're preparing to have a child, and what they are worried about protecting their children from, and certain stuff like that. But it's it's crazy. Not at all what I expected it to be, which is a good thing. I don't know what I expected it to be, but it definitely wasn't whatever I thought. Whatever I thought it was. So hey, spoiler warning for Mother. I recommend you watch this one without it being spoiled first, because I imagine it takes away a little bit of the oomph if you know what's coming. Part of the charm of this movie is just all the shit that keeps happening one after another, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? So yeah, I recommend go watch this one. But if you don't, letting you know right now, I'm about to spoil everything about it, so you've been warned. The movie starts off with a very bloody, very disheveled Jennifer Lawrence staring at the camera, and fire is engulfing her, and we hear people in the background screaming and crying, and then we cut the silence and we get the title card for Mother, and then we go over to No Country for Old Men, who is putting this diamond on this diamond holder. I don't. I guess it's specifically made to hold these diamonds or crystals or whatever you want to call it. And he puts this stone, this diamond, on this stand, and we watch as the house surrounding him clears up of all this dirt and this muck, and everything gets clear and clean. And we go into the bedroom where Jennifer Lawrence wakes up, nowhere near as bloody as she was seen earlier. And she's like, baby, you know, and she goes looking for No Country for Old Men. And eventually he sneaks up behind her, and she's like, oh, you scared me, you know? And he's like, oh, sorry, I needed to be by myself. You know, I needed to think of ideas to write and stuff. And she's like, oh, well, did you? And he goes, no, I didn't. And she's like, oh, don't worry, it'll come, you know? Also, I know it doesn't really bother me, because you know, they're of legal age, but it is kind of weird watching Javier, whatever his last name is, I forgot already after reading it, and Jennifer Lawrence, where she's like, I think she was 24 when they were making this, or there was a 21 year age difference between them in this movie, playing husband and wife. Yeah, it's just kind of weird, because he's so much noticeably older than her. They mention it in the movie. They talk about there's like a generation between you guys, you know? But that being said, this movie did lead into kind of real life with the director, Darren Aronofsky, or however you pronounce it. Him and Jennifer Lawrence started dating for a while, and he was like 20 years older than her. So, yeah, so like I said, you know, it's fine. It's just, you know, always a little weird, you know. But anyway, she's like, oh, you'll get ideas. I know you will, you know. So he goes to try to write again. Jennifer Lawrence, meanwhile, goes in this room where she's painting this wall, and she puts her hand against the wall and like morphs inside of the wall, where we see this heart, and it's beating inside of the wall, this nice clear heartbeat in the wall and shit. And she's like, oh, and she shakes it off, and then she starts painting the wall. That night, they're chilling out in their living room, just like talking and shit, and there's a fucking knock on the door. And two things: it's nighttime, so it's weird that they're having this knock, and second off, we have only seen a couple glimpses outside of the house, but from what we've seen, they live in the middle of nowhere. This is grass and woods, and you know, they're secluded from everything. So they're like, why the fuck is there someone knocking on the door? So No Country for Old Men goes down to answer the door, and motherfucking Ed Harris, who I had no idea was in this movie, obviously his most famous role when he played the husband of the daughter of the dead guy in Creepshow, who comes back to life as a zombie. That's his most famous role. I will not hear otherwise. But Ed Harris is here. I don't think he's been in a episode yet, which seems weird. We need to watch Creepshow, but I haven't got around to it yet. So he would pop up in that, but yeah. But Ed Harris is here, and I was very excited to see him. And it turns out that he's a doctor. They call him Doctor, you know. He's like, oh, he's Doctor. He tells them that he was here to write this paper, and he just moved here, and some people told him that this was a bed and breakfast. And No Country for Old Men is like, that's crazy, you know. But he's like, listen, you can stay here, you know, that's fine. And Jennifer Lawrence, you can tell, is like, what? Why are you letting this fucking this fucking dude stay here? But eventually she's like, okay, you know, whatever. So Ed Harris and No Country for Old Men go into like the living room, and they're talking, they're bullshitting. Jennifer Lawrence goes to make them some tea, and as she's gone, this is the first time that we see this happen. I refer to it as heart attacks, but I think it's just called I think they just call it like hyperventilating or something, but she has this thing where she just starts grabbing her chest, and like the world gets all dirty. Like the walls start looking how they looked earlier when No Country for Old Men put the diamond on the stand and shit. And she's like, oh, and she starts, leaning over, and she drops this teacup and breaks it. And No Country for Old Men is like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine, And eventually, she takes a deep breath, and we see some of that black char like clear up and go away, and she's okay. So she takes in tea to Ed Harris and them, and they're talking. This is when he tells them how he wound up here. Jennifer Lawrence, after No Country for Old Men tells Ed Harris that he can stay here, he goes out to like get his bag, and Jennifer Lawrence is like, we don't know this guy, and No Country for Old Men is like, he's a doctor. And she's like, yeah, but who cares? We don't know him. But, No Country for Old Men is like, he's a doctor. What do you care? Like, there's no bad doctors, So No Country for Old Men starts showing Ed Harris inside of the house. And eventually he takes him into his office, where he shows him all his awards and all this stuff that he's written. He's a poet. And Ed Harris goes, you wrote this? And the guy goes, oh, you read it? And he's like, read it? It changed my life. This is, this stuff is amazing. And No Country for Old Men is like, oh, thank you, And even Jennifer Lawrence has like this little small smile on her face because she's happy to see like her husband get this praise or whatever. But then Ed Harris goes to grab the diamond that's sitting on this counter, and No Country for Old Men stops him. And he's like, don't touch that. It's very important to me. It was given to someone very important to me. And Ed Harris is like, oh, was it her? And he looks at Jennifer Lawrence. And Jennifer Lawrence clearly doesn't like talking about this diamond. And she's like, no, it wasn't me. And No Country for Old Men is like, I'm sorry. I lost everything in a fire long ago, And this was one of the things I was able to salvage or whatever. And so No Country for Old, or Ed Harris is like, all right, I'm sorry, I won't touch it or whatever. Throughout all these conversations we're having, Ed Harris keeps having this big cough. He keeps like coughing up shit. And he keeps telling them, oh, it's okay. It's just, fucking, I swallowed this drink wrong, or all this stuff. Meanwhile, he's like trying to smoke inside, and Jennifer Lawrence, like, she's like, we don't smoke in here, and she like kicks him out and shit. But something's clearly up with this dude's cough. So, in the middle of one of his big coughing fits, No Country for Old Men tells Jennifer Lawrence, he's like, listen, I'm gonna stay up with him for a little bit. I'm gonna situate him. Why don't you go to bed? So she's like, okay. So she goes to bed. But she wakes up a little later, and she notices that No Country for Old Men hasn't come to bed yet. And she's like, what the fuck's going on? So she goes to look for him, and when she goes in Ed Harris's room, she sees like this bowl filled with cigarettes and a lighter sitting there. And she's like, oh, I can't believe, I told him no smoking in the house. And then she hears coughing and like throwing up. And she opens up the bathroom, and No Country for Old Men is like holding Ed Harris over the toilet as he's throwing up, and he's like naked and shit. And she's like, oh, what's going on? And the dude's like, nothing. He just has a cough. And Jennifer Lawrence looks down, and there's like a cut in his side, and quickly No Country for Old Men like covers it up so you can't see what it is, And he's like, give us some privacy, and he kicks her out. So she's like, all right, this is real weird. But then the next morning, it gets even weirder, because Ed Harris comes to breakfast, and he's just acting like nothing happened. He's like, oh, I slept great. I slept like a baby, And he goes outside, and he's like smoking a cigarette, and she's like, you're okay after last night? And he's like, what do you mean? And she's like, this is weird. But before she can dig any further into it, there's a ring at the doorbell, and they go to open it up, the night before, by the way, she had another one of those little heart attacks when she left. And this is the first time that she goes in the bathroom and she pulls out this little Gatorade lemon lime mix and pours and pours it in this glass of water, and that clears up her heart attack thing. So anyway, there's a ring at the doorbell, and they go and answer it, and it ends up being Ed Harris's wife, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who's here. And Ed Harris is like, "Oh, you made it," and then just starts like Skinamax, like softcore porn, making out with her out on the front step, and Jennifer Lawrence is like, "What the fuck? What's going on? I didn't even know you had a wife." And he's like, "Oh yeah, this is my wife. You know, I'm glad she finally made it." They bring her in and they start having breakfast and they're talking to him, and Ed Harris and the wife are making out some more, and eventually they bring up their kids. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we have 2 boys," and they show them pictures of the boys, and then they ask them, they're like, "Do you guys have any kids?" And Jennifer Lawrence is like, "No," and No Country for Old Men is like, "Yeah, but we want some one day," and Jennifer Lawrence gives him this look like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And you're like, "Oh, Jennifer Lawrence doesn't want kids." She's like, "What is this guy, doing?" So later that day, after breakfast, Jennifer Lawrence is trying to paint this room again that she was starting off the movie by doing. And Ed Harris's wife comes in and tries to talk to her. She brings her like some lemonade and stuff. And she's trying to talk to her about like why she's cleaning up this house instead of them just buying a new house. But Jennifer Lawrence says, this is his house. I'm trying to make this a paradise for us and stuff. And the lady's like, "Oh, you really love him. And then she eventually she's like, "Can I ask you a question?" She's like, "Why don't you want kids? I noticed that look that you had at the table this morning. I don't know, why wouldn't you want kids? It's great. It's something you make together and stuff." And Jennifer Lawrence doesn't speak, but Michelle Pfeiffer looks at her face and she goes, "Oh, you do want kids. So it's him that doesn't want kids." But for some reason, he said he did at the table, and that's why Jennifer Lawrence gave him that look, because she wants kids, but he hasn't given it to her. This is also the point in the movie where I noticed Jennifer Lawrence still had this thing going on, where she looked like she wanted to cry in every every scene that she was in. The wife then looks up and she sees No Country for Old Men's office open, and she's like, "Oh, is that where he works?" And she starts to go up the stairs to go to the office, but Jennifer Lawrence like runs after her and grabs her, and she's like, "No, he doesn't let anyone go in there. Don't go in there, And Michelle Pfeiffer's like, "What are you talking about?" But as they're on the stairs doing this, Ed Harris and No Country for Old Men come walking out of like the living room, and they're like, "Oh, we're going on a walk. We'll be back in a little bit, guys." And they leave out the front door. So then the 2 women go and they're like doing laundry and shit. And as they're down here, this is the first time that they mention, or they don't mention, but Michelle Pfeiffer is able to realize that like, No Country for Old Men hasn't been having sex with Jennifer Lawrence. Like, she's like, oh, she can tell that like they haven't been together for a while. And she's like, "I don't understand why. I mean, look at you." She's like, "If he's not all over you, it's either because like he can't get it up, or..." And she stops herself, and Jennifer Lawrence is like, "No, what do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, clearly, he's still in love with you or whatever." And she realizes like she's digging a bigger hole for herself, so she gets out of there. Also, as she leaves, we see Jennifer Lawrence go in the laundry and like pick out Michelle Pfeiffer's underwear and throw it out without without the other underwear, not washing it together. And I was like, "God damn, bitch, just fucking..." Earlier she pushed Ed Harris's lighter under a dresser because she doesn't want him smoking, and now she's throwing out laundry. I was like, I get this isn't ideal, but try to be a little a little better house guest. Later on in the movie, I think it's justifiable with anger that she has towards him, but right away I'm like, come on, man, just chill out. A little sip of water on this fine day. So a little later, Jennifer Lawrence goes looking for Michelle Pfeiffer, and she can't find her. So she goes into hers and Ed Harris's room, and she goes in the bathroom because the sink is running, and no one's in there. And at the sink, there's a bunch of tissues with blood on them and shit. And she's like, "Oh, what?" So she throws them in the toilet and flushes them, but then the toilet clogs up and starts coming. And she's like, "What the fuck?" So she goes and gets the plunger, and she's plunging the toilet. And then she sees at the bottom, like this inky, fleshy squid thing at the bottom of the toilet. And she takes the handle of the plunger and pokes it, and it like shoots a little bit of blood and goes swimming down the drain in the toilet. And she's like, "What the fuck is going on?" And then when she leaves the room, she notices that in Ed Harris's bag, he has this photo of No Country for Old Men. And so she's like, "Oh, this guy knew, who my husband was. He didn't just come here for no reason." So she walks out. As she leaves the room, she sees that Michelle Pfeiffer has gone in the husband's workroom, and she's like, "God, I just told you." And so she goes in there and stops her from poking around, and she's like, "Get out of here! You're not allowed in here." And so as they're leaving out of the office, Ed Harris and No Country for Old Men come back, and Ed Harris is having one of his coughing fits. So Michelle Pfeiffer goes down there to take care of him. And as they leave, Jennifer Lawrence pulls No Country for Old Men aside, and she's like, "I need to talk to you. This guy knew who you were. He's an obsessed fan. He didn't just come here, on accident." And No Country for Old Men is like, "I know, as we were out on our walk, he just told me that." He goes, "Listen, he's dying. He came here because he wanted to meet me before he died and shit." And Jennifer Lawrence is like, "Oh." And you can tell she's still like, doesn't like the idea that this guy lied about it, but she can sympathize with like the situation. And so she's like, "Oh, okay." But before they can finish their discussion, they hear a crash from upstairs, and they look up, and Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer are back in the husband's office. And so they both run up the stairs, and they see that they have broken his diamond thing. It dropped to the ground, and it's shattered. And they're like, "I'm so sorry. We didn't mean to. We just wanted to look at it." But this is the first time that No Country for Old Men loses his temper. And he's like, "Fucking get," and he yells at them. He's like, "Get out," or whatever. And he kicks Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer out of the room. Jennifer Lawrence goes to comfort him, but as she goes in the room, he's picked up shards of the diamond and is squeezing them in his palms, and just blood is leaking out of his hands and shit. And she's like, "You know what? Never mind. I'm gonna go leave." So she goes to kick Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer out of the house, but as she gets to their room, they're just fucking on the bed, and she's like, "What is going on?" And of course, to make things worse, she starts having one of her heart attacks, so she has to go and get more of her Gatorade mix to fix up everything. So she goes back into the living room, or first she goes downstairs and she packs their laundry. She gets it out of like the washer machine and puts it in a bag, and she's going to kick them out. As she's heading that way, she hears like banging, and she's like, "What the fuck is that?" And she goes and sees that her husband is nailing wood across the office. He's like, "They'll never get in here again." And she's like, "Well, you don't have to do that. I'm kicking them out." And he's like, "Where will they go if you do that, So he's already making up his mind that they're going to stay there, but he's preventing them from going in his office again. But she's still of the mind that she's going to kick them out. So she goes and knocks on their door, and Michelle Pfeiffer answers it, and she's just in her underwear. And she's like, "Listen, you two need to leave. We're kicking you out." And Michelle Pfeiffer's like, "Oh, really? We're or you?" And before she can answer, Michelle Pfeiffer just closed the door in her face and goes to, because Ed Harris is like coughing in the bathroom. She's like, "I need to take care of my husband." So she closes the door. Jennifer Lawrence starts knocking on it again, trying to get her open. But before she can do that, she starts hearing someone going, "Hello? Hello?" And she goes out, and this dude has just walked in the house. And she's like, who are you? And he's like, who are you? Who are any of us, you know? And she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, listen, I'm here to see my dad. Take me to my dad. This ends up being Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer's oldest son, who they lead, or Michelle Pfeiffer comes out and sees him, and she's like, what are you doing here? And apparently, Ed Harris had not told his sons that he was dying. They just found out. So he's here to confront his dad about why he didn't tell them they were dying. But as he's trying to confront his dad, the youngest son walks in. I think he's the youngest. He looked younger than the first brother. But he's got long hair, and he is played by, I'm pretty sure, one of the I'm pretty sure he's General Hux in those new Star Wars movies, or they're not new anymore, but you know what I mean. And he was also one of the twins from Harry Potter. And I thought I had read that the oldest brother was also one of the twins, but he didn't look like it. He looked a lot different than than the other one. Anyway, yeah, he comes in, and he's also upset that Ed Harris didn't tell them they were dying, but he also wants to know what's going to happen with Ed Harris's money. And they're like, what are you talking about? Now's not the time to worry about that, you know? And the two sons start fighting. No Country for Old Men comes down and breaks it up for a second. But before they can go and like all calm down, General Hux like talks about the money again, and the older brother's like, listen to you talking about this money, who cares, dad is dying. And they start fighting, and someone ends up punching Ed Harris in the gut on accident, and so he's all humped over coughing and shit. The two sons start having a fist fight. They're running around fighting each other. Jennifer Lawrence is following them, like, please stop what you're doing, you know. As they're running into this one room, the younger brother picks up this doorknob that No Country for Old Men had broken off of his office door with his fist. He was angry, and he fucking and he hit it off, and so it was sitting at the bottom of the stairs. He picks it up and chases his brother into the room and hits him in the back of the head with a doorknob, and then proceeds to hit him, I think, 3 more times as he's laying there. And he murders his brother. His brother is fucking dead. He also smacks Jennifer Lawrence in the face as she's trying to stop him. He goes crawling over to her, and he's like, this was a mistake. You understand, don't you? I didn't mean to do this, you know? And he's like rubbing his bloody hands all over her face. No Country for Old Men comes over and grabs him and like slams his head onto a counter. And so he starts bleeding from his head and shit. And he's like, it was a mistake, you know? Everyone's crying. They go and get Ed Harris, and they're like, we need your help, you know, fucking the kid's dying. Hux takes this time to just sneak out the front door. He just walks out all bloody and shit. They pick up the older brother, and they're like, we gotta take him to a hospital, he's gonna die. And so they're all leaving, and Jennifer Lawrence is telling her husband, she's like, please don't leave me, you know, stay here with me. And he's like, just lock the door, I'll be back as quick as I can. And they fucking leave. And once again, as they leave, we see the outside, and it's just grass. It's in the middle of nowhere, and woods, and there's no car. I'm like, how the fuck are y'all even gonna get there, you know? But anyway, they leave, and we go to nighttime now, and they're still not back. And Jennifer Lawrence has locked all the doors. She's trying to clean up the blood stain on the floor where the kid was fucking murdered. But this one spot won't clear up, and she's like, what the fuck, you know? And so finally, she like pokes it, and it's soft, and it caves away from the floor, and we see that it leads into the basement. So she goes down in the basement, and we see that it's dripping the blood into this light bulb, And when she turns on the light, the fucking light bulb explodes and rains this blood all over the wall and shit, and kind of exposes like this doorway looking thing. And she's like, what the fuck is this? And so she takes these little pliers and breaks open this pathway that leads into this deeper part of the house. Which classic, you gotta have a hidden basement room. Seems like every movie I've watched for the last 4 weeks has had a hidden basement room. But yeah, she opens it up and she's like, what the fuck is this? But before she can explore anymore, she hears a noise from upstairs. So she goes upstairs, and we see that one of the doors that she had locked and shut earlier is open. And she's like, oh, fuck, I didn't do that shit. Also, lying on the floor is that picture of her husband that Ed Harris had in his bag, but it's been torn up into pieces. And the funny thing is, I swear that someone has drawn horns onto the top of his head. And the reason I say that's funny is because of the hidden story or meaning underneath the movie playing out that I'll talk about later. But it's funny that they're portraying him as the devil right now. So she leans down to pick up the picture, and as she does that, the younger brother is standing right behind her. And he's like, you get it now, don't you? You get what I did. And then he just walks into a different room and like picks something up off the ground. I'm not sure what he took. And he just leaves, and that's it. He's gone from the movie, never to be seen again. So yeah, shout out to him. He just like came back in and grabbed his shit. She goes to call 911. But right as they pick up, she looks and sees No Country for Old Men standing in the doorway, so she hangs up. She doesn't talk to them. And she's like, oh, thank God you're back, And he's like, I know, I'm so sorry. They tried their best to save him, but, the kid died and shit. And he's like, listen, let's just get cleaned up and go to bed. So, that's what they do. They clean up and go to bed. And then in the middle of the night, she hears a noise, and it's Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer coming home, and they have friends with them. And she's like, what the fuck are they doing? And No Country for Old Men is like, oh, I'm sorry, they had no place to stay, so I told them they can invite friends over, And so they go down into the kitchen, and everyone's gathered together. There's probably like 8 people in here right now, and they're having a toast to the kid, and No Country for Old Men makes this whole speech about life and death, and no one's really gone, their voice is still with us, and all this stuff. And as this is happening, the doorbell rings, and even more fucking people come in. They have food and shit, and eventually, this whole fucking house is full of people. It's just, like, to the brim, full of people. She's getting flustered. She's running around trying to get people off of this sink that she keeps telling people it hasn't been properly put in place yet. It's loose still. Don't sit on the sink. There's people like fucking just chilling out like in different rooms of the house. There's in the bathroom. They're just like all over the place. Eventually she sees this one dude trying to take this girl into her bedroom and fuck. And she goes in there and she's like, this is my fucking room. Get out of my room. And she has to kick them out. This is the point. Well, she also starts having one of her heart attacks and she has to go take some more Gatorade mix. But I was like, why doesn't this bitch just stay in her fucking room and not deal with these people? Like, I get she's trying to protect the house, but clearly, like, this isn't going the way she wants. So I'm like, why don't you just stay in here and wait for everyone to leave? But she doesn't. Eventually, she comes back out. And when she does, she sees that the couple that she kicked out that were trying to bang in her room are now painting the whole house. And first off, she's mad that they're painting her house. Second off, they're painting it the color that she didn't like. Earlier, that scene where she was painting the wall and the first time she put her hand on it and saw the heartbeat, she put this like gray paint on the wall and she didn't like it. And then she made this like yellow paint and she liked that and she was painting everything yellow. But these people are using the gray, and she's like, stop fucking painting my house, And they're like, oh, sorry. So, more people are showing up. She kicks these people off of the sink once again, as she does this random dude comes up to her and starts asking her to take a walk with her and stuff. And she's like, no, I don't want to. And he's like, well, here, take my number. And he's like, I don't want your number. And she looks back and the people are on the sink again. And she's like, please get off the sink. And then the guy's like, oh, come on, just, you don't know what I could do for you. And she's like, I don't know you. And he goes, you know what? Get out of my face, you stupid cunt. And I was like, oh, shit. And then she turns around and the people are back on the sink and she tells them to get off again. But they start going, look, it's fine, I told you. And they start bouncing on the sink. And eventually it breaks. It crashes the sink out of the wall. And water starts shooting everywhere. Everyone's getting soaking wet. The pipes are all fucked up. And this is what causes her to kick these people out. She's like, get out of my fucking house. She's screaming and shit. And so, finally, these people leave the house. No Country for Old Men is like, oh man, that was crazy or whatever. And she's like, yeah, it is. It's crazy that you always have to do things to benefit you. She's like, I know the only reason you're inviting these people here is because you haven't written anything since I started working on this house. I've put together this whole house and you haven't written a fucking thing. And she's like, you keep inviting these people here hoping it'll give you inspiration or an idea, but it doesn't because you don't have any ideas. And he starts yelling back. He's like, I know that. I'm fucking suffocating in here and shit, Life doesn't always turn out how you want it to. And she goes, yeah, I know. She's like, why did you say you want to have a baby when you won't even fuck me? And I was like, oh, shit, it's getting real personal. So she goes to walk away and storm up the stairs all mad. But No Country for Old Men grabs her and they start to do like the angry making out on the stairs. And eventually they go upstairs to bang. She wakes up the next morning. And she's just like staring out at the grass. And she's like, I'm pregnant, And she rolls over and tells No Country for Old Men that she's pregnant. And they're having a baby. And he gets super fucking happy. He's like, oh man, this is great. And then he gets up and he has like this rush of energy. He's like fucking Uncle Joe or whatever that dude's name was from Willy Wonka. After he learned Charlie got the tour at the chocolate factory, he just hopped up with his dementia-riddled body. And he was like, here we go, Charlie, we're going to the fucking goddamn Willy Wonka factory. That's how he sounded. And he's like, oh my God. And he goes running into this room and he starts writing. And he's like, I have all these ideas. The overflow of, those people dealing with the pain and their death, but now the joy of life coming into this world. And he's like, I love you so much. I gotta start writing, So he starts writing his poem. And she's like, oh, cool now. Then she goes in the bathroom, and I guess her being pregnant cures her heart attacks because she just takes all her Gatorade mix and pours it down the toilet. And she's like, I won't be needing this anymore. And then we do a fade into a time jump where she's pregnant as fuck, and she's making this nursery and shit. And she's walking around the house just getting shit done, being pregnant and stuff. And she goes out into the main room, and she sees No Country for Old Men standing at the front door, and he's kind of just trembling. He's shaking, and he has this piece of paper with him. And she's like, what's going on? And he turns around, and he goes, I finished it. And she's like, the poem? And he's like, yeah, I finished it, and he's almost crying. And she's like, can I read it? And he's like, yeah, So he gives her the poem, and she goes over and sits on the stair. And as she's reading the poem, we get this overlay of No Country for Old Men standing outside where everything is burnt and destroyed, and the house is burnt and destroyed. And then Jennifer Lawrence grabbing his hand, and everything around them blooming and turning green, and everything building up once again. And all this is like what her emotions, or what the poem conveys to her. And I thought it was a really creative way to convey like the emotions of like a poem like that. I thought it was a really good scene. And she starts crying. She's like, I love it, And he's like, oh, but for some reason and she's like, well, I just want to, I don't want to lose you. This won't make me lose you, will it? And he's like, no, I'm with you forever, you know? But then the phone rings, and he immediately goes to the phone, and it ends up being his publisher. And she's talking about how she loved it, and she's ready to get it all published and shit. And Jennifer Lawrence is like, wait, so she read it? And he's like, yeah, of course. And instantly Jennifer Lawrence's mood like drops. She thought that she was the first person to read this poem, but he's gone around and already showed it to all these business people and all this shit. And she's just kind of like, oh, okay, you know? And she walks away, and we fade into, once again, another time jump, and now she's super pregnant, almost ready to pop. And she's making a celebratory dinner because it was the first day of this guy's poem getting released, and every single copy has been sold and shit. And so she's getting dinner ready, and as she's in the kitchen, she hears a noise from outside, and she turns on the light, and there's just a guy standing at the window, and he's like waving, and she's like, what the fuck? And she goes running into the kitchen to get her husband, or no, running into like the dining room to get her husband. And she sees that he's outside and there's a bunch of people there. And she goes out and she's like, who are all these people? And he's like, I have no idea. They all came here to see me. And the guy who was standing at the kitchen window comes around the front door, and he's the first one to talk. And he's like, listen, we all read your poem. We loved it. It spoke to us. He's like, it felt like the words were written for me. And No Country for Old Men is like, well, they were. And then he starts like hugging everybody and shit. And Jennifer Lawrence is like all fucking sad. She's like, oh my God, you know, I just want to have this dinner with him. She goes up into the nursery room where the crib and everything is set up. And we see that the nursery room just happens to be where that kid was murdered earlier, because she sees blood forming under the carpet, and she peels it back that we see that blood stain on the ground is still like going strong and shit. So she's like, I don't know what the fuck is going on. Eventually she goes back downstairs, and now there's like thousands and thousands of people out front, and they have lights set up, and they're all taking pictures of No Country for Old Men. He wants her to come out there and take pictures with them, but she's like, I don't want to do that. She goes, I'm having your baby. Isn't that enough for you? And he's like, of course it is, you know? And she's like, I don't want to, you know, I want to be alone with you. I don't want to have all these people or whatever. But No Country for Old Men is like, they came all this way though. What do you want me to do? And so he goes back out to talk to more people and take more photos. And she just goes inside and closes the door. And she locks it behind her. She just leaves him out there to do, you know, whatever he's gonna do. And then she looks, and these people fucking sneak in. It's a mom and like her son. And she goes over and she's like, get the fuck out of my house. And she's like, I'm sorry, my son just needed to. And she looks down, and the son is like pissing on himself. And Jennifer Lawrence is like, oh, okay, you know, come on. So she goes in the bathroom, but there's already people in there pissing, and she's like, what the fuck is going on? And she opens up the door, and there's a line of people all waiting to get in, and they're like, hey, don't cut the fucking line, lady, you know? And she's like, what are you talking about? This is my house. And then she goes, and there's like a homeless dude, like tearing off like a fucking curtain, using it as a blanket, and he's like sleeping on the floor. They come in the house and set this table with these books to take autographs, and No Country for Old Men comes in, and he's like, oh, I'm just giving back to my fans. And he sits down to start signing autographs and taking pictures. And then his publisher comes in, and it ends up being fucking Kristen Wiig. I was like, oh shit, what is she doing here? So she's the publisher that we heard on the phone earlier. As this guy's taking photos, I did notice that the picture that they've set up behind him, you know how like at meet and greets they always have like the picture of the guy you're meeting, like his like you know, headshot or whatever behind him. The picture is the same picture that Ed Harris had in his suitcase earlier and shit. And I was like, oh, look at that, the same photo, you know. So then people just start fucking stealing shit. They're like, we need to have something that belonged to him, you know? So they start stealing vases. Vases start dropping and breaking, and she's freaking out, trying to get people to stop. She tries to call 911 at one point, but another person hangs up the phone for her and then tries to call someone of her own. But a guy comes and just rips the phone off the wall and takes that. And she's like, what the fuck? She goes back into the living room, and even more people have come in, and now she sees No Country for Old Men surrounded by all these women, and he's like got paint on his finger, and he's like putting these marks on their foreheads, and they're rubbing up against him, and he's like a messiah to these fucking people. She goes into the bedroom upstairs, and she looks outside and sees even more people coming out of the trees and shit to come to the house. And she's like, oh my God. And she puts her hand on the wall, and we go back into the inside the wall, and we see the heartbeat that now it's decaying and it's slowing down, and it's a dirty black heart, you know? So she packs a bag. She's going to leave. She's like, fuck this shit. She packs up a bag. She's getting ready to leave. But as she's doing that, we see, I mean, they have like a priest here, and they have all these pictures of her husband everywhere, and the priest is telling them, you know, his words are your words, and we belong to him, and all this shit, and they keep calling him the poet and stuff. The house is just getting trashed at this point. People are just taking everything. Some people are starting to fight. There's more stealing. Jennifer Lawrence is just trying to make a break for it, but the husband ends up finding her, and he grabs her, and she's talking about, hey, you know, I'm having the baby is coming. Like, I'm about to have the baby. And No Country for Old Men is like, okay, just give me a second. And then the next thing, the police just break in. Like, the riot squad just break in. And they start arresting everyone, including Jennifer Lawrence. They pin her up against the wall, and they try to arrest her. But No Country for Old Men comes over and grabs him and pulls him away. So then they proceed to pepper spray the shit out of No Country for Old Men and Jennifer Lawrence. So now Jennifer Lawrence is all fucking blind from pepper spray, and she's stumbling away and shit. As she's running away, she comes across this random fucking cage filled with all these women who are just chained up in this cage. And then this guy comes from behind her and starts rubbing on her tits and like peels up her lips to look at her teeth and everything. And there's just this human trafficking ring going on. Like, I was like, what the fuck is happening? So more cops come in. They come into that room, start fucking arresting people. She leaves the room and goes out into the living room and just walks into a full-blown riot. There's cops on one side and rioters on another. The rioters start throwing Molotov cocktails and shit. Everything's just on fire and everything's getting trashed. She then goes into another room where these people are on the ground with bags over their heads. And Kristen Wiig is walking over them and shooting them all in the head. And she's like, oh, there you are. I wondered where you were. And she tells the people that with him, she's like, kill her. But before that can happen, a fucking tank shoots a hole into the wall and blows up Kristen Wiig and kills her. And so Kristen Wiig is now dead. She goes into another room, and this soldier comes in, and it's the first guy to stop and be like, oh, are you okay? You know, and she kind of looks down at her stomach, and he's like, is it the baby? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, okay. And he calls for a medic, but then he just gets shot in the back of the head, and his fucking whole head just, like, explodes and shit. So this whole place is a war zone at this point. It's just, turned to dust and stone. She's trying to get away, but No Country for Old Men finds her once again, and he leads her away to the stairs where people have set up legit like camps, like bunks and all this shit. It looks like the apocalypse. And she gives away their position. She's like, no, you need to kick all these people out of there. And they're like, hey, that's the poet, you know? So they start to swarm them. It turns out that the people on top of the stairs have blocked off all the people on the bottom. And they're like, hey, up here, come with us. And so No Country for Old Men is like, they'll protect us, you know? And so they reach up, and the people from on top of the stairs pull them up to safety up where they are. And this is when Jennifer Lawrence starts having the baby. She's like, it's coming out. So this woman tries to help her have the baby. And as she's doing that, No Country for Old Men is trying to peel the wood off of the door where he boarded up his office earlier. Um, Eventually, he gets the wood off and gets her inside, and they lock themselves into the room, and they block it with like a dresser and shit so no one could get in. Um, and after some screaming and some pushing, we have a baby boy, who is, freshly born and shit. And once it starts crying, all the commotion we heard outside stops. It just gets real silent, and they're like, "What the fuck is happening?" So No Country for Old Men goes over and he opens up the door and he peeks out, and we see that the people have brought them gifts. They brought them a basket of fruits and vegetables and this pitcher of water and all this shit. And she's like, "Oh, okay." And she tells them, she's like, "I want them to go. Please make everyone leave. And so he's like, "Okay, I'll be right back." So he goes outside, and when he comes back, he says, "Listen, they just want to see the baby. They just want to see him once. And she's like, "No, I'm not letting them see my baby. Make them leave now." And this is the first time where he goes, "I don't want them to leave." And she's like, "You're insane. And so he's like, "Here, let me hold the baby." And she's like, "No." And he's like, "Let me hold my fucking baby." And she's like, "I'm not letting you hold the baby." And we just get in a straight up standoff with this baby where they stare at each other for 2 days. We go through a morning cycle, a night cycle, another morning cycle, and it's basically just seeing who will fall asleep first. And she's like, "I'm not letting you have the baby. But eventually, after 2 days, she dozes off just enough. She never falls asleep, but she dozes off just enough for No Country for Old Men to go and get the baby. And when she wakes up, she sees he's outside and he's like showing it to everyone. And she goes to try to stop him, but when she turns him around, we see that he's given the baby up to the people, and they're like crowd surfing it above their heads and shit. She goes to stop them, and as she's going, the baby's like pissing all over everyone and it's crying, and she's like, "You're gonna hurt him." And as she says that, literally, this is what I'm doing, voice to text or whatever. So I go, "Oh, he's pissing fuck." I go, "Oh, he's fucking pissing all over everybody." And, "Oh, fuck, they broke his neck." And yeah, they just snap his neck. It just, his head like falls off. They don't support his neck and shit. And eventually she gets up to the altar that they've made him go to. And the priest is standing there that we saw earlier. And he's like, "He's still alive. His voice is with us." And everyone starts crying. And she goes and moves him away, and we see the baby just fucking torn apart on this altar. Just blood and guts and everything. And then we turn around and we see that everyone has pieces of him and is just eating his flesh and shit. And finally, she loses her shit, and she sees this broken piece of glass on the ground, and she picks it up and just starts stabbing people in the face and in the neck, and just killing everybody she can get her hands on. Eventually, they stop her, and they fucking hit her to the ground, and they start ripping her shirt apart so she's naked. They start stomping on her and kicking her in the face, and they're calling her, like, whore and slut and all this shit. No Country for Old Men eventually comes and stops them, and he's like, "Look at what they've done to you, and he's holding her as she's all bruised and bloodied and shit. He tells her that they can't let their son die in vain, and they need to make it right, so they need to find it in themselves to forgive these people. And she's like, "You're fucking, what? No way. So he keeps pleading to her, but she rolls away from him and does the thing where she puts her hand like against the floor again, and we see the heart once again, and now it is completely void of life, and it stops beating, and it's a dead heart inside of this house. And she lets out this scream, and the house splits apart, and she starts calling everyone murderers, and she's like, "You fucking heathens" and shit, and she scratches her husband across the face. And she's like, "I'm fucking out of here. As she's leaving, she finds the lighter that she hit under the dresser earlier, and she picks it up and takes it with her into the basement, where she goes over to this furnace that's under there, and she hits the side of it to spill out all this oil and shit. And No Country for Old Men goes down there, and he's like, "Stop, please," you know. And she's like, "I gave you everything, and you gave it all away." And then she drops the lighter into the oil and just blows everyone the fuck up, including herself. This is when we see the same shot that we saw at the beginning of the movie with her in the fire and her eyes staring into the camera. Yeah, we go to white, and then when it comes back up, No Country for Old Men is carrying her through the burnt up house, and he's completely unscathed. He hasn't been hit at all. And she's like, what are you, you know? And he goes, "I am I, and you were, you were you or whatever, or you were home," is what he says. And he carries her over to this table, and he's like, "I'm taking you back to the beginning." And the dumbest part about all this is that this woman is burnt beyond belief. I mean, she was at the center point of the explosion, and she's able to have a full conversation with this guy without just screaming in pain at the loss of flesh and the burnt nerve, you know. Yeah, it was a little silly. But anyway, he's like, "Listen, I need to try again. I have to try again. I have to get it right." And he's like, "I need one more thing from you. I need your love." And she's like, "Take it." She tells him to take it, you know. And so then he just rips open her chest and takes out the heart that she has inside of her, and pulls the heart, or it crumbles the dust in his hand. And out of the dust comes that diamond that we saw at the beginning of the movie. And so once again, he goes up to that little placeholder for the diamond, and he puts it on there. And this time he like has this crazy laugh as he is putting the diamond on the mantle. And we see that same shot of everything clearing up and going from the burnt to the new and the fresh. And we go into the bedroom where the lady wakes up in bed, and she turns around and says "baby," just like in the beginning. But it's a completely new wife. And so we see this is like a repeating cycle. He just gets different wives every time. And that's it. That's the end of Mother. What a fucking wild experience. This movie had a budget of $30 million, made a box office of $44 million. I think on opening weekend it only made $7 million, and apparently that's the lowest box office that Jennifer Lawrence has ever had in her life, or her career. Which kind of makes sense. This is a weird movie, and the marketing for it was weird, like the trailers. So it doesn't seem like a big box office hit. But at the same time, it has Jennifer Lawrence, who in 2017 was still top of her game, box office wise, and No Country for Old Men, No Country for Old Men I think was 10 years before this movie, but still, that dude is a fucking great actor. So I'm surprised it did kind of as bad as it did, but at the same time, not really, based off of what the movie, is. And this is when we can get into kind of the underneath of this, where basically, if you've heard me talk about it or if you watched it yourself, if you don't get it, Aronofsky explained the concept of the movie, which is Lawrence is Mother Earth. The house represents Earth and the planet, and her husband, he's God, and throughout the time, Ed Harris is Adam, and that missing or that cut in his side is supposed to be the rib that God took from Adam. And then the next morning, Eve arrives, and their sons are Cain and Abel, and the murder. And that diamond is the apple, the forbidden apple, and throughout time with all the riots and the famine and all this stuff, it's showing Earth dying over time. The people who are hopping on the sink, it's Earth telling them don't do, and us being like, no, we can do whatever we want. And now the fucking polar bears are fucking going extinct, and everything's dying and shit, and just breaking apart the world. Also, the Great Flood. That's another, with all the water and shit, the Great Flood of the Bible. And that's basically the underlining theme, or not but the underlining story. Like, it's a very religious story going on here. The I am I that he says to the lady as he's carrying her is apparently a line that God used in scripture a lot, you know. Yeah, and it's all fucking yeah, it's all this religious scripture and shit. The funny thing, I gotta see when I'm editing this, I'll go and see if I can pull or see if there really were horns drawn on the dude's head, because I swear it was, and so I was like, oh man, he's the devil. But then, you know, later you're like, oh yeah, he's God, you know. But I have to see if maybe I just saw something I actually didn't, you know. Let's do best of, worst of. My best of, I think I'm going to say my best of is when the Suns show up. And so it was the first time we got that kick of just this high-paced or fast-paced, anxious feeling of what the fuck's happening, and then the murder, and it all just hits the fan like so fast. And I would say that's my favorite, because later on in the last 20 minutes of the movie, it's fucking insane. But I don't know, the baby death is pretty good too, which apparently the baby death caused a lot of controversy amongst not only the like censors and stuff, but Jennifer Lawrence thought it was over the line, which what the fuck does she know, am I right? But anyway, yes, I'm gonna stick. My best of is when the brothers show up to the point that, you know, one of them is murdered. That was a great part. Worst of, I don't know, man. There's not a lot of worst ofs in this movie I can think of. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Yeah. Trying to there's got to be something. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Yeah, so I'm not gonna give one. You may be asking yourself, well, if I can't think of a worst of, why did this movie only get an 8? When sometimes I give 10s to movies that have a part I can give a worst of, and that's because fuck you, I wanted to. How's that? Anyway, yeah, that's it. That's Mother. Great movie. Go check it out if you haven't. There's a good chance that you will hate it, but I really liked it, so I want to force it upon you to go and watch it. Yeah, so that's it. Next week, let's see, what do we got on here? Next week, I think we're gonna watch Nori the Curse from 2005. I believe it's a Japanese movie, and I heard it's supposed to be pretty scary. So that's what we're gonna watch next week. Besides that, go check out the gaming channel. A Gun video will be out. Gun the Game. Shout out to Gun the Game. I think from also 2005. So that's cool. Yeah, and that'll be coming out. And pretty soon, probably a Sons of the Forest just dropped. Me and Tyler are very excited about playing that. We played the first one ages ago. There's a video of that. I think it's like the fourth or third video we ever made on that channel. So, yeah, so we're very excited for the sequel. But besides that, thanks for watching. See you guys next week for Nori the Curse. And, yeah, that's it. Bye-bye.